Oh, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the rest of you. I did not see the countdown, so that is on me, but welcome back to episode 39 of Bitcoin Magazine Live. I have returned. I did not get frozen solid out in an undisclosed location far north of me, but not north of the border. Thank you guys for tuning in last week. We have a really exciting episode this week and a really fun guest to kick things off. But before we do that, I want to remind everyone, or unfortunately let you know, if you have not already, the tickets to Bitcoin 22 prices have gone up. We have warned you about this time and time again. The code YTMAG will still get you 10% off. If you have not bought your tickets yet, I highly recommend, because prices will just continue to go up and the FOMO that will set in will drive you absolutely insane, almost as bad as not buying Bitcoin the first time you heard about it. But I digress, and I'm excited to introduce my guest today, Nick Neuman, the founder and CEO of Casa. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hugh, thanks for having me.
So Nick, obviously with everything going on north of the border, I don't want to spend too much time rehashing those details, but over the last, I'd say 72 hours, we've seen things escalate to a point where self-custody has become the norm. We saw Marty Bent on Tucker Carlson last week discussing this. We see it now being conversed by, I'd like to say, just say normies, people who aren't even involved in Bitcoin are starting to hear this term. I'd love for you to define it just for our audience and anyone listening. What does self-custody mean?
Yeah, so self-custody really means that you are being your own bank. That's kind of the easier way to think about it. So a custodian is somebody that holds some asset for another person. So our world for the last, few hundred years has all been about banks being custodians of people's money. So your bank has your dollars or your Canadian dollars or your pesos, whatever fiat currency you've been using, your bank holds that for you. And whenever you want to use it, you ask them, hey, can I send a transaction to this person? Or can I spend money on my credit card? And generally, at least in the Western world, they approve it. And now what we've seen with Canada is that's not necessarily a good assumption anymore. And I think that one of the questions that we get asked, have been asked over the last 3+ years of Casa's existence is, do people really need to care about self-custody when we live in a system where there's banks with perfectly adequate security and there's exchanges like Coinbase who have invested a lot in their security and they're not sketchy, et cetera. And, I think that the answer to that has always been this kind of tenuous, slightly conspiracy theory sounding, yeah, because financial censorship isn't necessarily limited just to dictator-led countries. And everybody kind of waved that off until last week when suddenly everything accelerated way faster than probably any of us conspiracy theorists could have even guessed. And, we've got Canada using their emergency powers to lock people out of their bank accounts.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, to your point, it's as though these conspiracy theories that we would laugh at, or the notion of not being able to access your money or being told, no, tell these people that I don't like or that have values or think a certain way that they can't access their money. I heard a very interesting quote, which was during the height of the Black Lives Matter protests, not one time did Donald Trump or any of these political leaders in America ever attempt to shut down people's bank accounts, attempt to shut down their access to information. And here we are seeing essentially a completely different regime north of the border doing our worst fears and having them be realized. Can you talk a little bit about how or what steps people can take and how, for example, Casa helps you to be your own bank and self-custody your Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing that I think is important to point out before we get, I'm happy to answer that. But before we get to that, one thing that I think is important to point out is what you said, that President Trump, didn't freeze anybody's bank accounts during the BLM protests, which were arguably a lot more violent than what we're seeing in Canada today. And what's interesting about that is right now, the trucker protests, depending on which kind of side of the aisle you are on, the trucker protests are either this great thing for freedom or they're this thing that is terrible and needs to be shut down immediately, and everything that the Canadian government can do is valid. I think that when you look at this idea of financial censorship, if you are on that more left-leaning side that views the government taking any steps possible to get rid of this protest as something that is valid, all you need to do is think about the flip side, which is, what if President Trump had frozen people's bank accounts during the BLM protests in 2020? It's a nonpartisan issue. It doesn't take that much of an imagination to flip the script and just think, what would I be thinking if this was being done by the opposite political party? And so that's something that I think is really important here. This idea of financial censorship is one that's nonpartisan. And it's not saying that I'm not saying Trump did this great thing by not freezing people's bank accounts. It's more, the point is, like, you should never be thinking about freezing citizens' bank accounts, especially when they are participating in exercising their right to free speech through protest. And it's just, I think it's a fundamental right in our countries that we're going to have access to our money and savings, and leaving or letting that go, both from the citizens side, where we aren't openly criticizing governments that do this, or from the government side and taking advantage of this emergency to grab power. I think it's something that is unacceptable, and we really have to be clear that that's a nonpartisan issue. So to answer your, yeah, go ahead.
We can put a pin in that question, because I think you also bring up a very excellent point, which is, it doesn't really matter what side of the aisle you sit on. It doesn't matter what your beliefs are. We need to have this openness of differentiating beliefs. It needs to be okay for someone to have a belief different than yours, and to have a conversation about that. Right. I think I'm going to misquote Trudeau, but if I can find it, I will. When he came out with a statement that said these people who are protesting have unacceptable views or an unacceptable perspective, these are some numbers that just denounce what he says. The total Canadian population is about 76% vaccinated when I checked this data last weekend. The trucker population in Canada is over 90% vaccinated. This is not actually a protest about vaccine mandates. It is a protest about government overreach. And when you actually start to break down the things that Trudeau pushes forward versus the things that, frankly, the truckers are fighting for, they're almost two different sides of this argument. And it really comes down to who has the power and who, frankly, wants to remain in control and dictate to everyone else who and what to do, say, think, and act like. I think now, to bring it back to Bitcoin, the opportunity that we have in this community and with this digital currency, if you will, affords us the opportunity to take some of that power away from these centralized entities. We've seen it over the years with different banks having control of our monetary policies in this country, abroad, throughout history. But for the first time, we're able to take that out of everyone's hands.
Yeah, and I think I've seen some really interesting discussion around this, because there's some people saying, no, this is a policy issue. There's some people saying, no, just take it from the government by using Bitcoin. And honestly, it's a little bit of both, I think, in the end. So we should be pushing for policy out of Washington, or your respective government hub, depending on what country you live in, that really enables the right to self-custody for people. And that is important, because without that, if self-custody is made illegal or something like that, then I think that the movement could lose a lot of steam amongst law-abiding citizens. But at the same time, you need to have you can't just have the laws, because laws can be changed. So you also need to have the actual, I guess it's a threat of exit. There's kind of vote and participate in the conversation or exit. And the ability of people to exit into Bitcoin and into self-custody is coded into the cryptographic foundations of Bitcoin. And you are not changing that. And so that capability being there as this exit path for people financially into sovereign money where they are the only ones that hold their keys is really important, because it can actually help give some bite and some credence to this idea that we should enable people to self-custody, because it's a human right to have financial freedom, and because it's something that if we don't enable it, there's a good chance people can take advantage of it anyway. And so these are things I think that we need to have both of these types of initiatives, both the legal policy side initiative and the fact that we know we can use Bitcoin, and we need to make it as easy as possible for people to self-custody and as secure as possible for people to self-custody in order to enable that.
I totally agree. I think the UX and user experience is vital, because we need to sort of create less, not sort of, we need to create less friction so that it's just easier and easier to transact via peer-to-peer Bitcoin. I think you touch on an excellent point that I kind of want to dive a little deeper into. The idea of what laws are made or can be made in the future is, in a sense, arbitrary. Whatever we desire can just be written into law, or what we think or what governments think is best. But if the government starts to make it more difficult for these on and off ramps, such as Cash Apps and Coinbases and whatever other exchange that is just as easy as downloading Facebook, creating a new profile, and then boom, here you're off to the races to buy whatever token or Bitcoin that your heart desires. What happens though if, instead of stopping or blockading these sort of the self-custody off ramps, it's the ramps before? What happens to those users who maybe aren't as familiar with peer-to-peer transaction of Bitcoin and get stuck because now, hey, if I buy on Coinbase, the government knows, and I'm just as screwed whether I buy on Coinbase or whether I try to just use my bank account?
So I think there's kind of two paths here. You mentioned like total shutdown of government, or of on-ramps that are regulated by the government. And honestly, I don't think that's going to happen, because I think that the industry has gotten big enough and there's enough money in the industry. Coinbase is a publicly traded company. There's massive multi-billion-dollar hedge funds with positions in Bitcoin. I think that the industry has gotten big enough that it would be just such a big mistake for the government to shut it down completely from an on-ramp, off-ramp perspective, that I just don't think they're going to do that. But there are people that are working on solving these problems to allow people to have other ways to on-ramp into Bitcoin without it going through a centralized exchange like Coinbase. And I think that you see a few different types of this. There's more recently what Square's working on with TD-DEX, which is more in the regulated side of things, but it's allowing as many people as possible to act as on-ramps to Bitcoin. And then there's what some of the guys like Local Bitcoins are doing, where you're able to actually exchange cash for Bitcoin in a completely peer-to-peer way. The thing is, a lot of people, I think, aren't currently comfortable doing that. Many people don't even really use cash. And so it's something that the user experience there would, I think, need to improve pretty significantly in order to onboard a lot of people to Bitcoin and like continue onboarding the volume that we are today. But I think from the perspective of, are the main on-ramps going to get completely shut down? I just don't think that will happen. It's more likely that the government tries to regulate as much as possible within the ecosystem. And that's where it's on our industry to help educate lawmakers so that they can understand how to put regulations in place that don't significantly breach users' privacy or restrict the industry's ability to grow and create innovation, jobs, value within our country.
I think that what you ended with there is so important, that innovation and growth is going to help push our industry, our country, our society forward. And we need to do and take steps to, I'm going to say this very weirdly, but we need to take steps to prohibit we need to essentially not prevent this innovation from occurring. And yet here we are witnessing it in a weird way, almost these rules and regulations that are being put into place are putting us in the Bitcoin community on the spot. This is our time, our opportunity, whether it's figuring out ways to teach people from around the world how to peer-to-peer transact, whether it's, hey, how do you onboard virtually? How do we teach these people how to do this while we are in one country and they are somewhere else? I think it's a great lesson that it will be replicated, and it'll be interesting to see how it continues to be replicated around the world. I do now want to unpin my original question and I guess present it to you in a different way of how would you help to explain self-custodying on Casa to someone who is looking for that information right now?
Yeah, so the I'll to answer this question, I'll zoom out slightly and just explain for somebody who's never heard of self-custody before how this works. When you self-custody your Bitcoin, you are holding the private key to that Bitcoin. And that private key is like a password to unlocking the Bitcoin and allowing you to send it to somebody else. And it's a super long, randomly generated password of letters and numbers. And because it's so long, that makes it impossible to guess, impossible to brute force or try to hack, and impossible to fake. And so it's a very unique cryptographically based type of password that's protecting your Bitcoin. So the thing is, when you are holding your own keys, you're not giving them to an exchange or a custodian to hold for you, you are the only person who has control over your Bitcoin. So what that means is that nobody can freeze your bank account because you are your own bank. Nobody can force you to send funds, your Bitcoin, somewhere else, unless they literally come to your house and force you to do that. Right now, with the current banking system, somebody with the right authority or power can basically call up the bank presses a button on their end and your account's frozen. It's very easy. When you're self-custodying your Bitcoin, it adds a lot more operational overhead, I guess I would say, to forcing people to give up their money. So one of the problems, that's all the benefits of self-custody and of using private keys. One of the problems, though, is that when you are the sole person who has control over that key, if you lose that key, there's no password reset button. There's no calling up your bank and saying, hey, put this money back in my account, because you're the bank. You have the responsibility to protect that key and that Bitcoin. It's a lot like if you have a $100 bill in your pocket and you accidentally lose it on the street. That $100 is gone unless you can go find it. And with Bitcoin, if you lose that private key, it's gone. And because of how cryptography works, it's basically impossible to find again. So how does Casa help with this? We were looking at this problem back in 2018 when we first started the company and saying self-custody is, and this censorship resistance that it enables, is the most important function of Bitcoin as money. It's the first sentence in the Bitcoin white paper, is that this provides the ability to transact peer-to-peer over the internet without a third-party institution. And so we looked at this problem and said, there's a lot of people who feel anxious about holding their own private keys because they can barely keep track of, their Facebook password. How are they going to keep track of this private key that's this super long series of letters and numbers or a bunch of words written on a piece of paper? And so what we've built is a product that makes it much easier for people to secure their own private keys, to self-custody their Bitcoin, be their own bank. But while we've made that significantly easier, we've made it so that you are still the one in control. The way this works is we have a couple of different tiers which offer different levels of security. And so at the very basic end, it's a free mobile app where your private key is on your phone, and we make it super simple to get started. It's way faster to set up than a Coinbase account. But as you go up in value of Bitcoin, you want more security for that Bitcoin. And so that's where we start to get into having multiple keys protecting one pool of Bitcoin. And so when you have multiple keys protecting your Bitcoin, you have resilience against single points of failure. So let's say you lose a key. Well, if you've got 3 keys protecting your Bitcoin, you only need 2 of them to send funds. You can lose 1 key and not have to worry about losing access to all of your Bitcoin. So in that basic setup, you've got 1 key on your phone, 1 key on a hardware wallet like a Trezor or a Ledger or a Cold Card, and then 1 key is held by Casa. Now, a lot of people who are using hardware wallets today to protect significant value in Bitcoin, this is a no-brainer because you can go from using the same device that you already have, you can go from that single point of failure to a more distributed, more resilient security setup for protecting your Bitcoin. And this just significantly reduces people's anxiety. We hear over and over again from our customers, peace of mind is their favorite thing about using Casa because they can now sleep at night without having to worry about making one mistake and losing all their money. So that's the gist of how Casa works. We've made it super approachable for people to do this. And we have a lot of customers who come to us either because they were using a hardware wallet and were feeling anxious about it, or maybe they were keeping their funds on an exchange and because they didn't trust themselves to self-custody. And now they're self-custodying for the first time with Casa because the product user experience, the support that they can get makes it much safer and easier for them.
I want to ask a question on that, it's a dumb question, but I think it just needs to be asked.
Sure.
I lost my cell phone now. That is one of my 3 keys. What is now, explain a little bit about the fact that there's 1 key missing, how the other 2 keys can operate, and how, if possible, that missing or lost key can either be rediscovered or recreated, if you will.
Yeah. So when you lose your phone, we actually help you back up that key that's on your phone to the cloud. So we encrypt the key and then you back it up to iCloud or Google Drive. And this all happens in the background. So that key that's on your phone is actually sitting in iCloud or Google Drive in an encrypted format. So if anybody were to come across it, they wouldn't be able to make any use of it. But let's say you lose your phone. You can get a new phone, log into Casa, log into iCloud, and that will pull that private key down from iCloud, take the encryption key from your Casa account, decrypt it, and save it on your phone again. And so you actually don't have, in that scenario, all you need to do is replace your phone. And if you still have access to those 2 accounts, it's like a 2-factor authentication there. You can actually just recover that key without having to worry about any other steps in the process. Let's say you lost the hardware wallet though. So you lose that hardware wallet and the first step is you need to get a new one. You get a new hardware wallet and within the app, you can just say, hey, I lost my hardware wallet. And the app will then walk you through the next steps for you to take to replace it. You'll put the new hardware wallet into the set of 3 keys, getting you back to 3 keys total. But there's a process that you need to go through after that. Because anytime you add a new wallet, a new private key to your set of multiple keys, it creates an entirely new wallet. This is how this works at the Bitcoin protocol level. Your Bitcoin's still sitting in your old wallet. And so in order to get it into that new whole kind of fully secure wallet with 3 keys, you actually need to transfer it from the old one to the new. And so you'll set, the app actually walks you through all of this. It creates a transaction, you're signing it with your key on your phone. And then you're also requesting that Casa sign it with our key. So you can always rely on Casa having our key as a backup in case you lose some of your keys. And the benefit of this is, we're not going to lose that key, but at the same time, we can't move any funds without your permission because it's only 1 out of your 3 or out of your 5 total keys. So once you get that signature from Casa's key, then you've got 2 signatures, which is what you need. You need 2 out of the 3. You transfer the funds from the old wallet to the new, and then it's back to full security. Now, when you talk through this out loud, it took me about a minute to explain that. It feels like a lot, but the way that we've built the product experience, you don't have to remember any of that because the app walks you through every single step by step when you get there, and just helps you get that best in class security, best practices without you having to really even know what's going on behind the scenes.
Uh, I love that. And thank you so much, Nick, for walking us through that, because as you mentioned it, yes, it was a lot, but I think it's important to take the time and have that explained, because sometimes like many of us will just read it and it'll go over our heads. So thank you for walking us through that.
Totally.
I do want to ask, because it's been presented now a few different times by people in the chat, and even my producer, Chris. I'm going to sum up all these questions under one umbrella. KYC. How obligated is Casa under the current KYC laws? Are you guys, if Canada turns around and asks, I don't even know if you guys technically operate in Canada, but if the US government, for example, were to turn around and ask, we need to know what of your customers are doing this, is there an internal discussion on, hey, for these reasons we give it, or is it just a blanket absolutely not? Where does Casa sort of fall, or how would you handle that situation?
So Casa we don't KYC our customers. So under the current laws, you are not required to KYC customers as a self-custodial wallet provider. And so we take full advantage of this because we want to protect our customers' privacy. And you don't have to go through KYC to sign up. You can sign up with an anonymous email if you want. That's not even your normal email, and pay with Bitcoin. And we would have nothing more than that email to actually identify you. And so we've tried to build this in a way that people can only need to provide the limited amount of information that they want to provide. Some people want to give us more info because when they give us more info, we're able to provide a more premium experience. So like, for example, at our higher tiers, people can set up inheritance. And, for some of that stuff, they do need to provide some information that can help us know who their heirs are, to make sure that if the person passes away, we can work with their heirs to help them access their Bitcoin. But this is really a user choice, right? So for people who are worried about this, they have the ability to be fully pseudonymous within the Casa ecosystem. And that's a really important part of our product. So it's something that we think is very important from a privacy perspective. And we really want to work as hard as we can to preserve that capability for people to sign up completely privately with Casa.
Thank you for the work you do, not only for your customers and clients, but also in helping hopefully new clients and customers to learn and understand what you guys offer.
Totally.
I kind of want to get a sense from you. We talked a lot right now about government regulations, specifically north of the border. We hear a lot about legislative efforts here in our country right now. Are there certain regulations that you or your team is paying close attention to or nervous about in any regard?
I mean, the one of the ones that we're paying attention to is just some of the work that the FATF is doing right now. So the FATF is a non-governmental body that is governed by, it has representatives from different countries, and they make financial regulations that then countries can choose to adopt or not. And one of the regulations that they are pushing right now that's in draft form is about requiring people to identify their self-custody addresses, for example, when they are withdrawing from an exchange. And so this would, identify essentially KYC self-custody wallets at a regulatory level. It's something that we think is a terrible mistake, and because it's directly against people's financial privacy and individual sovereignty. And it's something that we're keeping an eye on, and also really looking to the broader community as well as ourselves to help educate lawmakers around the world about why this is a mistake. Because like I said, countries have the choice of whether they are going to adopt these regulations or not. And so it's something that we think is very important for lawmakers in the US to realize, hey, this is actively harmful against our citizens' privacy. And this is not one of the regulations that we should adopt from what the FATF is working on. So that's one thing that we're paying attention to right now. And over the last year, really since the infrastructure bill started happening, there's been a big push from our industry to get more active in DC with education, with lobbying efforts. And I think that's really important and very timely, because as we've seen, the regulation around cryptocurrency is just increasing and really heating up. And so this is the time for us to get active, talking to our senators, our congressmen, and to really push for them to understand where we come from as an industry and as a community. We're not a small community anymore. There's significant value and dollar value behind the Bitcoin community. And so putting that to work in showing that we can have an influence, an effect on elections, on policy is important. And I think there's a lot of Bitcoiners that say, fuck the government. We'll just do what we want. We don't want to deal with them. And I think that's short-sighted, because if we're thinking about the long game, about bringing as many people into Bitcoin as possible, we would want to enable that by having friendly regulations in our country. And so having that education and making those pushes, from whether it's grassroots or through dedicated institutions like Coin Center, I think it's super important.
No, that absolutely makes sense, that a company that's whole basis is helping people to self-custody is keeping a very close eye on any sort of self-custody laws and legislations going into place. It's almost as if, in a very classic sense, people that know nothing about an industry are making decisions about an industry that will end up causing more harm than good.
Right. Yep. And I think we underestimate how little a lot of the people who are making our laws have historically understood how the technology and how the industry works. And we're starting to see more of our congresspeople getting educated. You've got Tom Emmers, who does a lot of work in the House. Ted Cruz in the Senate is starting to get a lot more active around Bitcoin and around personal rights. And so I think that and I know there's others as well that I'm leaving out, and there's even some that are running for election for the first time who are very friendly to Bitcoin, like Erica Rhodes. And so these are people who we need to lean into working with, because they have taken the time to understand, whereas a lot of people haven't. And I think that's working with those people, leaning into that, is the first step towards educating the broader group within Congress.
Absolutely. We're starting to see, I think, this new class of Congress hopefuls starting to turn to Bitcoin, whether it's because they genuinely believe it, whether they want the votes, that remains to be seen. I do want to sort of give you the opportunity. You, in this scenario, you are able to sort of create or get rid of any legislation that you see unfit for the broader crypto market. What change would you make?
I think the biggest one that I'm focused on continues to be around people's right to self-custody and to have financial privacy and freedom with their money. This is private keys and cryptography have been around since the 70s, but Bitcoin really changed the game in terms of making them usable for money. And that really introduced them to people more broadly, gave consumers, individuals, a reason to use private keys. If you go way back in banking's history, we as a society used to do a lot more of this self-custody. People would keep coins or cash themselves, but over time, it's really gone away because of the convenience of using digital money. And with that convenience of digital money, we also introduced all of these risks around people being able to shut down your bank account with the press of a button. Now Bitcoin's come along and it's given you the convenience of digital money with the security and freedom of self-custody. And we as a nation cannot hamstring ourselves in allowing our citizens to take advantage of that freedom. The US is the country of freedom, right? And I think that I'm not alone in saying that the idea of Bitcoin fits so well with the idea of the United States. And our government should recognize that and should realize that leaning into this technology will give us huge advantages over the next few decades and maybe even more. And so when you have countries like China who have leaned all the way into a central bank digital currency where it's a digital currency where they have full control at the central bank level, which is one step further than what we have today in the US, right? Like at least right today, the regulators have to call the banks and tell them to shut off your account. Whereas with a CBDC, the government presses the button themselves. In a world where China is doing that, and honestly is a whole lot better than the US at playing this centralized game, right? They have been a centrally planned, more efficient, centralized society for a lot longer than the US has. What the US has been good at is leaning into capitalism and decentralization. And let's continue to lean into that, realize what we're good at, lean into that decentralization, and lean into the fact that individual freedoms matter in our country. So if I was going to really be pushing some sort of regulation or law, it would be to outline very specifically people's rights to use their own private keys, people's rights to self-custody, and have that financial freedom.
I love that. And I think, as my producer, Chris, put it, Bitcoin is as American as apple pie. And you guys are not wrong. The ideals and values of Bitcoin fall very much in line. However, where I kind of challenge what you say and push back is a lot of American dominance has come through the control of the global financial market and system. And I think this decentralization of the financial markets for the first time ever, there's no real example of a purely decentralized financial market, historically speaking. And I think there is a fear or concern that stems from that. I'm curious to know what your sort of solution to that hurdle is. How would you go about helping those with the power to make those decisions see things the way we see it? Because it almost feels as though those closest to the money printer have the most to lose, and as a result will hold on tightest to the current system. And if things play out the way we think they will with game theory, that could lead the US to being one of the last adopters. But I'd love your thoughts on sort of how we can push them in that direction before it's too late.
I agree with you that the US has benefited significantly from the ability to have the dollar as the world reserve currency. I think that we've seen over the last few years, whether they like it or not, American dominance is waning. Russia and China are starting to make their own moves, China's got their CBDC, Russia is pulling further away from the US. And I just think that the era of American dominance is really waning here, and we're not going to bring it back by doing the same thing that we've been doing. And so it's going to take a little bit of shining some sunlight on this issue and taking a very objective look at what's been happening, where things are going, and realizing that we need to do something different if we are going to continue to succeed as a country. And it may mean that we never have the dominance to the level that we've enjoyed over the last 50 years. But it could also mean that we still have some stake and influence in the world, and it does not become a world that is fully dominated by the more centrally planned, more efficient East, as China kind of becomes more of a rising nation. And so this is something that I think we have to be very realistic about. And I think you're right that the people who are in power today are highly disincentivized to look at this objectively. But we do have new people who are younger, who are spending the time and have less incentives to keep the system as it is today. And they're running for Congress, running for positions where they can have impact. And those people are looking at things objectively, seeing the benefits of using Bitcoin, of leaning into the technology and the freedom that Bitcoin offers. And I think we need to really push behind those people in order to enable or help the US to get over this hurdle. Because you're right, it's going to be tough. It's not going to be an easy transition no matter what, but let's lean into this tech that can at least give us some advantage versus just continuing down this path that we're on of just continually waning US dominance.
You touch on an excellent point too, and you've touched on it a couple of times throughout our conversation in regards to China and their sort of very extreme in the opposite direction stance. We saw them last year ban mining. They years ago banned Bitcoin in different degrees and variations, and yet people are still underground mining in China. The hash rate recovered to new highs. The largest fear, I think, of the dominance that China saw in the late 2010s in that decade, as far as Bitcoin mining goes, and the hash rate being a majority held within China, everyone was so concerned they're just going to turn around and control Bitcoin. And then all of a sudden, this whole decentralized idea that we have is gone because the Chinese government holds it. Well, that did not come to fruition. In fact, the exact opposite happened. Is there a concern or fear that is populating in pop culture, if you will, or in Bitcoin pop culture, that you're kind of looking at the China model of, yes, you're absolutely right, this is a valid concern. However, it could literally become negated with one or two things happening. Is there something like that in the forefront of your mind?
So can you clarify just at the end there, when you're saying, are you worried that the same thing that happened in China could happen in the US, or what are you asking? Sorry.
More in the sense of, there was this ongoing fear that because more than 50% of the hash rate was located in China, that China could in turn turn around and take over the miners. Is there something going on, whether it's Russia introducing it as a legalized currency, India taxing it an insane amount, or the fact that miners are coming into the US at a rate much faster than any other country? Is there something that's brewing that people are nervous about or have expressed concerns, where to you it's like, this is not in any way a concern to me, it will go away as fast as it came up?
I don't think I have a great answer for you there, if I'm being honest. I think that what I do know is we will continue to face challenges at the government level for Bitcoin over the next decade, probably. And for every challenge that we see, there's also something good happening that supports Bitcoin. So China banned Bitcoin mining completely. That ended up causing Bitcoin mining to become more decentralized, and a lot of mining coming to the US. People are worried about mining energy FUD and the amount of electricity that it takes. But there's very good arguments that say that Bitcoin mining could actually incentivize and provide capital for more build out of renewable energy and accelerate the transition to renewable energy for our society. You've got places like El Salvador adopting it as legal tender. I think that for every kind of bad news on a geopolitical or just existential level, you've got also good news. And that's how it's going to be. And it's about it's going to be a fight. It's not going to just, I think a lot of people say Bitcoin's inevitable, and to some extent that's the case, but I think that we should be doing as much as we can to help it along. And so I can't point to any one thing that I think this is an absolutely ridiculous concern. But on the other hand, there's a lot of things that are great that are either going on right now, or I'm sure kind of brewing behind the scenes that we really should be celebrating, pushing, and educating people about.
I love the optimism of your answer, where for every article of bad news that we see, there's an article of good news that we can choose to pay attention to just as well. And
pay
the
attention
point
to and share, right? Like sharing that and helping people see that is important. And I think the energy FUD one is a great example of this, because there's a ton of people saying Bitcoin wastes electricity, it's worthless, etc. And we've recently started making change in that conversation by being louder within the Bitcoin community and speaking their language, honestly, to explain why that is either not as big of a problem as they think it is, or it's something that will change over time and will actually become incredibly beneficial. And so not only do we need to pay attention to the positive things, we need to be sharing the positive things and communicating them in a way that people can actually understand it. We can't, there's something great about Bitcoin meme culture and about, us talking within Bitcoin Twitter, and everybody kind of it's the in crowd, right? And it feels great. But then there's also the important step of communicating to the rest of the world to help educate them and to share the positive news about Bitcoin and help them understand this new technology, just like somebody probably needed to help people understand the internet back when it was first invented.
I love that call to action as a reminder to everyone listening. Every piece of good news you hear, it's on you to share it, whether it's with another Bitcoiner or someone who's a non-coiner. Always spread the good word of Satoshi. I do want to maybe go way back and ask you to share with us sort of what was the conversation like when you first heard about Bitcoin? Who or how was it introduced to you, and what was your initial gut reaction? Were you like, oh yes, this is it? Or did you, like a lot of other people, think like, hey, this is sketchy, a scam, not touching it with a 10-foot pole?
Yeah, I think the first time I heard about it, one of my friends was pitching me on Bitcoin mining, and it was back in probably like 2013 or 2014 during that one of the big run-ups. And I was kind of like, yeah, I don't really get it. Didn't talk too much about it. And then I actually have a text message that one of my friends screenshotted and sent me from 2014, where I had sent something like, Bitcoin crashed, definitely a scam, or something like that. And I'm just like, damn it.
He kept those receipts.
Yeah. I mean, he must have really went digging to get that from 2014. But as many people have admitted to, I really kicked myself for not getting involved in Bitcoin that early. But I found it eventually. And I think it was more like end of 2016 when I got back into the whole, or not got back into it, but really started actually learning about it. And that was really when my personal Bitcoin journey kicked off. So
love that. And I love the fact that you have such a growth mindset to change your mind from calling it a scam to founding one of the leading companies for self-custody. So
I mean, I think that there's so many people that honestly could tell a very similar story of thought it was a scam or thought it was stupid, and then later came around and finally took the time to understand it, and just whether the situation was right, or they just, they read enough about it, the light bulb went on. And so this is why I also think we should be very understanding of people who are who are no coiners today, basically, and maybe even people who are, throwing shade on Bitcoin for things like its energy footprint, because instead of viewing these people as necessarily evil people or something like that, it can be useful to take the view of, I was maybe in this position one day, or historically, saying that Bitcoin was a scam. And so it took somebody taking the time to explain it to me for me to make that jump. How can we do that for as many people as possible who haven't made the jump yet? And so, yeah, I think there's, in the future, I hope there will be a whole lot more people who were no coiners and decided to start a Bitcoin company because of the efforts of today's Bitcoin community.
I love that. And that is yet another call to action for all of you watching or listening right now, that it is on all of us to push it forward. It's not just on one or two individuals in this community to continue to push Bitcoin, its use cases, and negating the FUD that's around it. I always will say, and will continue to say until I am proven right, because I will be proven right. This is a fact, just not today. But I genuinely believe that the next iteration of clean energy, both capture and utilization of clean energy, will come from Bitcoin, and specifically Bitcoin mining, because they are most incentivized to find the cheapest, most efficient ways to capitalize on energy. I remember explaining to my little cousin like how a company like Upstream Data is taking the flare that comes off of natural gas mining and utilizing that, and he couldn't comprehend the fact, like, wait, you're telling me that for decades on end we've just been wasting this energy? Like, it wasn't until
100%.
Bitcoin. But that exactly, that it was literally just being wasted in the universe. And so I put it on our community that we will figure this out, and it will be revolutionary for our society, and it will be very interesting to see what the reaction is by both those in the community and those who are not yet in it. And I say yet because I think that will be the final straw that will just, everyone will be convinced. You can't fight it.
Yeah, there's a lot of very interesting incentive structures built into Bitcoin and built into Bitcoin adoption, from things that we've already seen working, where bull cycles cause FOMO, people invest, and then they've got skin in the game and they decide to learn about Bitcoin and get fully orange pilled, or whether it's something that we haven't seen fully play out yet, like the clean energy argument that you just made, but we fully expect to see it play out over the next 5 years or so. I think there's a lot of really, really interesting social incentives that we will see come from Bitcoin over the next few years.
I do want to kind of ask you as well, because I've, over the course of meeting with and interviewing so many different people, it almost feels as though not everyone is on the same page of, do we push for store of value or do we push for peer-to-peer transactions? Where is sort of your home for Bitcoin in your mind, or what is the next place that Bitcoin needs to establish itself properly?
I mean, I think both of those will become true over the next 5 to 10 years, right? And the narrative over the last few years has been one that has been overwhelmingly about store of value and about inflation resistance. And people really have kind of ignored this idea of censorship resistance, especially in the US. Like the vast majority of people talk about inflation and helping solve that problem. And I think that the next few years are going to be, the narrative is going to be one of censorship resistance and of self-custody. And this is really the moment that Casa has been building for, right? We are building to help people understand and make this transition. And so I think that's the first most important transition for our community to go through, because it's estimated as of 2019, so it's possibly more than that now, that up to 60% of all Bitcoin was held by custodians. And so that's a crazy number. It comes from a Chainalysis report in 2019. And Chainalysis has a pretty good idea about this kind of stuff. If you look at Coinbase's Q3 like public filing, their 10Q, yeah, it says you can do the math and back into it. They had at the end of September about 2.4 million Bitcoin that they were holding. 2.4 million out of the probably like 18 million that are actually not lost today. It's insane. And this is a really important narrative for our community to start educating people on. And I think that's going to be really the first step that we need to take. And what's really interesting is what's going on in Canada today, I think is providing a lot of incentive for people to wake up and kind of realize why this is important and hopefully get their Bitcoin off exchanges, get their Bitcoin off of custodial wallets. So that's what I'd really like to see. But I think that to answer your question of store of value versus P2P transfer, it really depends on where in the world you are. So we're seeing in places like El Salvador that maybe have less of a developed fintech ecosystem, payments is becoming a bigger and bigger deal. They're actively pushing for this and actively building this into their financial system, which is great to see. Lightning Network has been growing a ton over 2020, the whole of 2021. And we're seeing more and more people getting into this payment side of Bitcoin. But you look at the US, and there's a whole lot less incentive for people to be using Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer method of exchange. And so in that scenario, I expect that it'll continue to be a censorship resistant, inflation resistant store of value. So it depends on where you are, which narrative will be advancing, but I think that over time, it will come to encompass both of them. And eventually, the third form of money, which is unit of account. So
you bring up an excellent point too, where we in America have the privilege of not necessarily having to worry about transacting our Bitcoin because our currency is to a degree stable. It is probably the most unstable it has been in 40 plus years. In my entire lifetime, worst inflation we're seeing is at this present moment. I'd love though to get your sense on where or what we see in El Salvador, what that effect looks like for the rest of the world. I mean, most of us are familiar enough with game theory to understand that this is the first domino falling. What do you see sort of, or what would you like to see sort of happen next? Another country either adopt it as legal tender or go the route of just legalizing it as currency?
I mean, I think you want to see as many countries as possible adopting it as legal tender, because that not only helps to spread education and usage of Bitcoin, but it also helps give the early adopters a little more air cover, basically, in terms of allowing them to do this without threat of retaliation from the rest of the world. But I think as far as how it will happen, I would actually argue that one of the big reasons why you don't see the need for using Bitcoin as a P2P payment system in the US is not that it's the US dollar is more stable. Like maybe that plays into it for sure, but we actually have a much more developed fintech ecosystem. And so you can just use Venmo to send somebody dollars and it's pretty easy. But in some countries around the world, that does not exist. And so you combine that with the fact that, yes, the dollar is more stable and potentially Bitcoin is more stable than whatever fiat currency that people would normally be operating in. And there's a lot more incentive for countries to adopt Bitcoin as a method of payments and as a legal tender. And so I think that you're seeing more of the countries in Latin America really taking a hard look at this. And it seems to be spreading there. I think there were some rumors about Russia doing some legalization in some form or another of Bitcoin, which would be very interesting in terms of how the game theory would play out with the US and our current relatively antagonistic stance there. I have no idea how that would play out. But I think that you'll see it grow more in these smaller countries. And eventually, hopefully, with the right education and the right policies and people in power, we can help it grow from a legalization perspective or legal tender perspective in the US. But like you said a lot early in our conversation, I do kind of think that the US will be one of the last to adopt it.
It's unfortunate, but our worst fears, I think, will be realized in that regard. I do
And I think
want
the
to.
important part is in the meantime, we just need to be making sure that the US policy is as neutral towards or positive for Bitcoin as possible, even if it's not going to be adopted as like a legal tender. Let's not kill the Bitcoin industry in the US or force it to go overseas.
Totally. I mean, we need to give it time to grow. To your point, there's so much money in it at this point, and it's not just everyday people's money. It is the big buyers in Wall Street and New York are all of a sudden involved. And what those people will always do is they'll go crying to mommy and daddy in Washington, D.C. Don't mess with my money. Don't mess with this right now. I have too much tied up. I can't afford to have you mess with this. Otherwise, I'm not donating. So for better or worse, in a weird way, we all want to see more adoption out of Wall Street because it gives us this weird protective moat for however long we need to continue to develop Bitcoin out deeper and deeper. I do want to ask you before I let you go, um, as legislation continues to get brought up in DC, there seems to be this mixing of Bitcoin and crypto. Could you maybe discuss a little bit of what the key differences that you see are and how you'd like to see this separated in legislation if it's ever brought to that point?
So I think I tend to actually take a little bit of a different stance than a lot of, I think, like hardcore Bitcoiners on how I would like to see um, legislation adopted in Congress. I think that we're already fighting an uphill battle to educate people about Bitcoin and about how this technology works and why it's not going to cause the downfall of the US government if we lean into it positively. To add another wrinkle to that of, oh, but you should not pay, like you should be antagonistic towards Ethereum or something like that. I think just it divides our strength within the community at a time when we need to use as much of our voices as possible to be pushing for the friendly policies towards Bitcoin and cryptocurrency at large. So for things that are outright obvious scams like Ripple, like that's great. SEC should be going after them. But I think that there's a benefit from realizing the fact that a lot of us, whether you're in Bitcoin or whether you're in Ethereum, whatever, are working together for generally the same goals, which are give people this technology that is based on private keys so that they can actually own their own money or digital assets or whatever, and then let people themselves, let individuals make the decision of where they want to invest their money, because that's the whole point of being a sovereign individual, is that we aren't telling you what to do with your money. That said, I think that if you look at the Bitcoin community or you look at the Ethereum community or other communities, we are playing a little bit of different games here. So if you're looking at what's going on in Ethereum Twitter over the weekend, a lot of people are talking about the OpenSea hack. They're talking about NFT security, that kind of thing. The Bitcoin side of things is talking about geopolitical overreach by the Canadian government and financial freedom. And so I think that the two communities need to actually realize that they're playing different games and going after different targets here. And Bitcoin is going after the very big goal of providing sovereign store, like a safe store of value, sound money for the entire world. Maybe the Ethereum community is going after more of like building decentralized tech and stuff. And they need to kind of stop trying to call themselves ultrasound money and lean into what they're really trying to do around other things besides money. And then the Bitcoiners lean into what we're trying to do around building a better money for the world. But when it comes to policy, we're at the broadest level, we are pushing for individual sovereignty. So let's not cut each other off at the knees by adding in all of this kind of, proof of stake versus proof of work versus whatever. Like, let's just push for people's ability to be sovereign individuals at the base level.
I love that. It continues to go back to the main point that we're going to hammer down. Let these technologies develop. Do not inhibit us. Do not step in the way or stop the continued advancement of the broader markets, if you will. I think I do have a similar point of view that there is space for a lot of other projects. I don't think necessarily every single project will last the test of time.
Yeah, like let the free market work it out over time, right? That's all. So many Bitcoiners are libertarians, right? Let the free market work it out over time. And if you decide where you want to invest your money, and let's push for the most friendly legislation as possible and see where things go over 10 years. And the one thing I know is that Bitcoin is going to be here in 10 years. I can't necessarily say that about anything else, but that doesn't mean that I feel like I need to be waging war within our community in order to help Bitcoin. So
I love that. Peace, not war.
Depending on who you're arguing against. Maybe war when it comes to financial freedom versus government overreach.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I do want to highlight, I believe it has now just premiered. I hate kicking viewers out, but be sure to check out, we just dropped I'm going to get the title wrong, and I'm so sorry, Aaron, because I know how hard Aaron and Natalie Brunell worked on this Go Fund Yourself documentary that they put together. Just premiered on our channel. Be sure to take a look at that as well. We will also be showing it later in this episode, so stay tuned for that. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today. Will you be in attendance at Bitcoin 22?
Oh yeah, I'll be there. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. What are you most excited for? Is there a speaker that you're excited to hear?
I'm just excited to really be with the broader Bitcoin community and to have it's a good mix of great conversations that with people that you only see once or twice a year, and the fun, more kind of, celebratory aspect of let's get together and just celebrate Bitcoin's success since the last time we were together. So I don't know necessarily about a specific speaker, but it's more just being with the community that I think is going to be a lot of fun.
I love it. I mean, you're spot on. Being in that environment I can't even really put it to words, but just being around that much bullishness. I mean, in the midst of the pandemic, to finally be at an event where masks were not required, to be able to have conversations that were hopeful, that were positive, pushing the whole community forward. I absolutely loved it. I am so excited to hear Bukele actually talk in person. Just the way that man behaves online. If he's half as funny as he is online as he is in person, we're in for a fun little comedy set, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, that'll be a fun one. I'll definitely be watching that one.
Nick, I do want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us and sharing your thoughts, as well as just the work Casa is doing. Big fans of Casa, and we'll continue to update everyone with how you guys progress.
Of course. Thanks, Q. It's great to be on. Happy to come on anytime.
Thank you, man. We're going to cut to a quick commercial break before we have Nolan come on for his segment of the Breakup. Welcome back, and thank you guys for staying tucked in with us. I'm excited to introduce Nolan for another segment of the Breakup. Nolan, how is Barbados, man?
Q, I love it here. Life's beautiful. I mean, I don't have to deal with the Canadian stuff. You know, this show is called The Breakup, and it's all about relationships with money. And right now, sitting in Barbados, it's like looking at your crazy ex or something, and they're not doing great, and you're like checking them out on social media, and their life is kind of like falling apart, right? So that's what it's like as a Canadian looking into from abroad the craziness of over there. And it's not really a laughing matter. There's some scary, scary stuff, but still, let's put it in context, and that's what we're going to break down today. So I want to start today with a story that was a few days old, but I think is important for what we're dealing with today, and that's the Charlie Munger story. So if you don't know who Charlie Munger is, he's one of the richest people in the world, I guess. He's close with Warren Buffett, and they've been working together for a long, long time, made a ton of money. And Charlie Munger did a long interview on, I think, CNBC or one of these financial shows of the day. And he did something pretty amazing. He at once isolated one of the great existential threats to democracy, to the modern nation state, to what's going on in the world, and that's inflation. And he was serious about it. In no uncertain terms, he said, this is what destroys civilizations. And he mentioned Rome. So he objectively saw this huge problem on the horizon. And whenever you have a huge problem, you got to solve it, right? So you have this desire to solve a major problem. And then he went on to talk about how Bitcoin itself was sort of viral. And he used a different word, but he meant viral, right? It has this mimetic quality that we all know, right? Bitcoin can be communicated through images, through really packed, dense information. That's what makes memes such a big part of the culture. So he definitely saw that. Charlie Munger definitely saw that. But I want to put two thoughts together here and show what Charlie Munger actually did for us. So if you do notice a huge problem, civilizational problem, and you have an appetite to solve it, you have a certain hunger, let's say, like a hunger, right? But if you're also staring at the answer to that problem, right, and you miss it, I say we call that a munger, right? Missing the hunger for the big problem you want to solve, right? So Charlie Munger, right? And it was kind of like, I don't want to make fun of people's looks or anything, but he's had those, you know, he's got really thick glasses and his eyes are kind of googly inside a bit, right? I'm not trying to make fun of him, but it was really hard to watch him there searching for the answer that was right in front of him. And when you think about this show, it's about relationships. It was kind of like a rom-com. You know, you're looking at this person, you're saying, the person who loves you is right in front of you. Just look, just open your eyes. It's right there, right? That's kind of what Charlie Munger did to me the other day. So I say we all call that now the B21 variant. When you're just before understanding the importance of Bitcoin, it's right in front of your eyes. You know the problems in the world. You know that these solutions can get you there, but you just can't see it. That's the B21 Munger variant, and it's spreading. It is spreading. The biggest spreader, oh, one more point on that. The last time his partner accurately also called Bitcoin, not in this case VD, not the viral nature of Bitcoin passing and all that, but he called it, so Buffett called it rat poison once. And I actually was kicked off of CNN, I think. I went on CNN when that came out and I said, you know, Richard Quest was interviewing me on CNN. I said, Richard, they're right, it is rat poison. And Richard looked at me and said, got some birds here. Said, what are you talking about? He's all confused. And I said, oh, you didn't know that the banks were the rats. And that was the last time they invited me on CNN, the buggers. I thought it was a good answer, right? Go look for that. They don't put that out there. That was suppressed, I say. Suppressed. No one heard about it. So now, with the Munger variant spreading, we see that Trudeau is an absolute super spreader, like a super spreader of the Munger variant. B21 is on the loose throughout Canada. I mean, on the loose, right? I got parrots here. They're upset about something. I don't know what their problem is. Let me throw something at them. Get out of here. So the B21 variant on the run. And the frame I want to use today to describe how it's spreading so quickly is really Newton's third law. That's the point of this show, right? Contrast, right? We contrast fiat standard and the Bitcoin standard, but contrast in general works better to persuade people than arguments or, you know, putting a really tight piece of logic together or litigating something as a lawyer might, right? So contrast really helps provide a lot of instruction. And that's how the B21 variant is spreading throughout Canada so well. So let's have a look now at some of these, super spreader events that Trudeau has caused in the past few days, because some of them are amazing. First up, so if you don't know Newton's third law, let me just preface it. It's equal and opposite reaction, right? So the contrast is created by one action happening, and then the reaction to that creates that contrast, right? So action, reaction. So what happened with the emergency powers invocation, it wasn't quite as simple as some people thought. It created a whole series of action reactions, right? So the first that I want to talk about, and this one's really important, right? This goes to the news, right? So the reaction to the news here helps Bitcoin for these reasons. Now, in general, the news, one of the things about it is that it flows in echo chambers, both in conservative politics and in liberal politics, right? So you've got a whole portion of it that in the case of conservative politics might only watch Fox News, might only watch online news. In the case of liberal folks, they might only be on CNN, MSNBC, and all these other things. And what happens is information doesn't pass over, but when it does, it can ricochet with great effect. And we saw the other day, Ilhan Omar, absolutely liberal Democrat, maybe socialist. I'm not sure. I don't want to put words in her mouth about how she would identify herself. But she came out and tweeted the other day concerning a journalist in Canada. So this journalist, Alison Ma, works for the Ottawa Citizen, which is a newspaper in Ottawa. Not so important. Might have been 50 years ago, but it's on life support. Trudeau actually pays to keep it open. Most Canadian media is actually on life support. Trudeau pays for it to stay open. Otherwise, it would have closed years ago. A lot of these newspapers, all of that would have been gone a long time ago. So Alison Ma, writing for the Ottawa Citizen, writes, the owner of a gelato shop in Ottawa says she regrets making her $250 donation to the truck convoy, saying she thought it was a peaceful grassroots movement. The Ottawa Citizen journalist then corrects that the cafe owner had known about the troubles in Ottawa for days, and it had been declared dangerous by the time she even gave the donation. So the journalist is sort of doubting the story of this small gelato owner, and then tweeted both the story from the Citizen and her take on it. And Ilhan Omar comes out and says, I fail to see why any journalist felt the need to report on a shop owner making such an insignificant donation rather than to get them harassed. It's unconscionable, and journalists should know better. And she mentions in there that this was a grassroots donation in the tweet thread that she had. One of the most amazing things that I saw instantly when I went to Ilhan Omar's own Twitter bio is you see that she's grassroots funded, right? So she's talking about grassroots donations, and she's protecting really her own network, right? She gets it, right? She gets it. I don't know about the Bitcoin piece, but she's got a strong case of B21 as far as I'm concerned. She's got some Munger virus right there. And so she noticed this, right? And one of the most amazing things that did to me personally, right, that they did to me personally, I can remember all those years ago when, some liberals would say, oh, terrorism is just a label. And I would say, no, we know what terrorism is, right? It's about the jihad and all these things, right? Well, I was wrong, right? I could have had that argument with Ilhan Omar 10 years ago. A year ago, I was that wrong still, right? Now it turns out I look at my own country and I see the police chief of Ottawa having a press conference. They got a new one because they fired the old one because he wouldn't do the damage, to kick the protesters out of the city. And he says right in there, we're going to sanction individuals. And this guy, I'm telling you, he's from, fascism central casting. Like he's, skinhead. This guy looks mean, man. Like if I was casting, some kind of a fascist in a role, I'm telling you, no casting agent can get me a better guy than that. So he's there telling me that individuals are sanctioned. I don't know if I'm sanctioned. I probably am, but I guess I'm a terrorist now. So whatever argument I'd have had with Ilhan Omar 10 years ago about the Patriot Act, I was wrong, right? So when you break the box like that, when you shatter the normal echo chambers that are there, you do a lot of damage in this case, right? I changed my mind. I have a whole new concept around this stuff, right? Ilhan Omar was right about that. I was wrong for 20 years, right? And now I understand it. Now I see it. Now I see how it can be twisted. I was completely wrong. And what we have here is actually a huge discrediting of the news in the end. The damage that's inflicted by one person like Ilhan Omar, who's behind the lines in the echo chamber, who says something, it echoes in there and does a tremendous amount of damage. If you look at the court system in Canada, I don't even, like I said, I don't know if I'm a terrorist. I don't know, maybe I can't go back. Like someone said, when are you gonna come back to Canada? I said, well, I mean, there's no rule of law anymore, so I don't think I can just go there. Like I kind of talk about Bitcoin a lot and people know, right? But luckily, people like me kind of saw this coming, right? So we are here. This is a situation where I have the space and time to see it as, like I said, a relationship and a partner that I used to have that's not doing so well. And I get to see it on social media, right? So that's what's going on there. So the police chief comes out and says he's going to do this stuff. We see all these images now of the Mounties, right? One of the things that Canadians prided themselves on. Do you know where that comes in the Canadian folklore and the mythology and all of that stuff? So there was a Wild West in America. There was no Wild West in Canada, yet it was pioneered. It was pioneered with diplomacy, with skill, right? And a lot of people say it was the Mounties who brought that skill. Maybe that's what we're taught in school. I have no idea anymore. History is probably as fake as the news, right? We don't know. So what I know is that we were taught that. Now we see what the Mounties did to people in the stampede that happened with some of the protesters, right? There was some blood, there was some damage, there was some horses trampling people. I don't know all the details. I don't know the details of what happened. I saw a lot of the video. I have a pretty good idea, but how can the Mounties ever come back from this? I mean, this is a huge blow. There's other blows to the Mounties, but this one was international, right? This is different than what was going on internally. And internally, it was already a meat grinder in there. It was already a kill box as far as, you know, they said for years there was a lot of Me Too stuff that hit that place, probably all valid, right? But now it's all going to come to the surface again. So there's another institution upon which the country was built that doesn't quite have the cachet it once had, right? We don't think of it the same way. Canada in general as a legal system now, what do counterparties think? What do financial people who have dealings with Canada think, right? They can't predict where they sit in law, and that's a major problem, right? A major, major problem. You can even see it with, you know, one of the things at the protest that was really remarkable was the amount of national anthem singing, right? Canadians were singing the anthem every time something would happen. They would sing the anthem. They would go, "Oh, Canada," and they would go on and on. Well, simultaneous to all these protests was the Olympic Games, the time when Canadians would normally come together, sing the anthem. I was at the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver that were hosted in Canada, and we sang the anthem at a heartbeat. It was a national news story that Canadians were acting so American in the rah-rah nationalism and singing their anthem everywhere, right? So they did it again here, but what I heard was almost like the anthem at a funeral, like it's dying, like it's a soliloquy for the end of something that was you loved and was important. It fits into my breakup, you know, frame that I use on the show. I couldn't help but hear it that way. I heard it as a lament, right? A lament for Canada when people would sing it. I didn't hear rah rah nationalism. And when I go look at the Olympics going on right now, here's the thing that I saw early about Canada and why I think Canada is at the forefront of this World War III thing, right? Canada, 1/10 the population of the United States, but much more credentialed, right? Much more credentialed. We sort of have one of every one of the American think tanks, right? We've got our Sierra Club, we've got our, I mean, it was invented, Greenpeace was invented in Canada, and it's on the right too, right? So you've got all of these special interest groups, almost as many as the United States, I'd say. I'm sure the United States has way more, but per capita, I'd say we have more in Canada. And what ended up happening was Canadians were sort of the victims of all this messaging, all these psyops, all of these arguments from all of these super educated people fighting over power and control and everything that went on in Canada. But because the country was a little smaller, a little more concentrated, the people were maybe victim to it a little more, right? So you end up getting perverted things like this. You get this whole story about the anthem and the Olympics that I mentioned, the Olympics going on right now, and you've got a guy like Dick Pound, great name. I've met him many times, Dick Pound. Dick Pound went to law school in Canada, was an Olympic swimmer, and then he was the guy who negotiated the big TV deal for NBC in the United States for the Olympics in Los Angeles and then in Seoul. And that's what really skyrocketed the Olympic Games in American consciousness. He delivered this huge TV deal. he would have been the new chancellor of the IOC had he not been in charge of the investigation into the Salt Lake City corruption. The same reason why Mitt Romney came and ran the Olympics after. So he investigated that and apparently made too many enemies. So they put that Belgian sailor in charge of it. Jacques Roga is his name, right? He took over after. Dick Pound was supposed to do it. He ended up getting WADA, the World Anti-Doping Association, which is in my home city. So they do all the doping for all the medical stuff, right? But here's the interesting part. Here's that medical piece, right? The medical, whatever you want to call it, medical state piece, right? He's been one of the main liaisons between the IOC and China when it comes to Peng Shuai, the female tennis player who we don't know if she's kidnapped, no one knows what's going on. He says she's fine, right? Dick Pound says she's fine. Maybe. I bring up all the story about Dick Pound just to show you that here's someone who's the chancellor of McGill University, the highest, I mean, it's like Harvard, running a major international organization, right? Supposed to be on top of medical business when it comes to anti-doping, right? That's a major medical field, telling you that China was right? This girl is okay, wasn't raped, don't even look there. She seems fine to me, he said. She seems fine to me. That was his exact quote, right? So Canada's been living with people like this. We don't know where he's coming from. There's a whole transparency problem there, right? A whole transparency problem there. And that's what we're going to see fixed. You see the opposite to that right now in the United States. There's all these people who are all upset that there's an American person who is being nominated to the directorship of nuclear energy waste management. And it turns out that this person has some kink. This person is into, they are into, I don't want to make a gendering mistake. They are into some sadomaso stuff. I don't know exactly what's going on, some clothing stuff. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is people are offended. Apparently it's going to be a big thing for Russia over America because this person is embarrassing. But hold on. I look at Dick Pound and I say, I don't know anything about Dick Pound, right? Who is this guy? Why does he say there's no rape going on of this girl? How does he know? He saw her on Zoom or something, right? So you get this guy who we don't know anything about him. So I don't think we're going to end or win the privacy debate necessarily, right? It looks like a lot of this stuff is coming towards us, right? What did you do? Where did you go? Access, all that kind of stuff, right? But transparency, I think, has to go in the other direction too, right? That's going to be part of the answer here. So we see this person right now and we see them as weird because they're trans or whatever and running a nuclear waste thing. I just want to know if they're processing nuclear waste because that means we're doing nuclear energy and that's all I care about. I think the pathway forward is going to be to know more about these people so that we don't care so much. Because if we knew as much about Dick Pound as we do about the managing director or the maybe a managing director of the nuclear waste stuff, I'm pretty sure Dick would have some fucked up shit about him. I'm pretty sure, right? Like, I don't know, but he's an Olympic swimmer. He's got all this power and made a bunch of money for all kinds of people, NBC included. And he seems to know what's going on in China about sex trafficking. So I don't know. Let's see, right? Let's find out more about Dick Pound. Before we have to tell him stuff, we should find out more about him, right? So that's Dick Pound. Now, what we can see with this sort of equal and opposite reaction here, right, is we don't know about the law. Not good for Canada, really bad for its reputation, right? We don't know about the news, right? That's I think what Ilhan Omar did. She would have created doubt in the minds of people within that echo chamber about whether or not the news is telling them the truth, which is already trending in Canada. It's already happening, right? So the reputation with the Mounties, no good, right? This is all pushing the country and its reputation down into the ground, right? Really important stuff. Then we get Majid Nawaz today, Spotify, Joe Rogan. All stories go through Joe Rogan on this show, right? We always say that. So we got to have our mandatory Joe Rogan mention today. So apparently the episode of Joe Rogan that dropped today is very difficult to access on Spotify. It's being suppressed. Apparently it was recorded quite a while ago. And Majid, who I followed for a long time, he's a London Islamic leftist, but really clever, really saw through a lot of lies and was one of the first pro-Trump people that I would qualify on the left. So that's one reason why I saw him as a really interesting voice. He seemed to be carving out such a unique space back in 2015 and 2016 when this stuff was crazy. So I've been following him since then. So Majid now does an episode on Joe Rogan, which dropped today, all about Canada and CBDCs and what the medical industry and big pharma wants out of banking. And that's what we saw in Canada, right? They deputized, 100% deputized the banking sector to be law enforcement. Canadians' banking sector, in order to deal with these folks, became deputized by law enforcement. So when the chief of police in Ottawa says we're going to sanction individuals, maybe like me, right? Once again, we see exactly what the book, The Sovereign Individual, predicted, right? It predicted that countries would treat individuals the way bin Laden was treated, right? They would sanction individuals the way you would sanction countries. We hear about all the sanctioning of Russia, right? Well, now they're going to sanction individual Canadians for small amounts, right? And Majid Nawaz, his podcast on Joe Rogan today was all about that. It was all about the infrastructure of vaccine passports and how CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, are the technology waiting to deploy all this stuff, right? So listen to the Majid. I haven't listened to the whole thing yet, but I'm told it's excellent, and I just like that it's been suppressed and what's going on, you know, there must be something good in it, right? So far, it's so good. CBDC stuff was tight. He explained it really, really well. Now, our last story, besides the sort of, you know, I guess that's it. When you see all of this sort of flaccid behavior, right? What we're talking about here are psychology engines, right? The things that perpetuate economies forward. When we see this kind of flaccid, am I a terrorist? We don't know. I don't know. Can I go to Canada? I don't know. Nobody knows, right? Is my friend a terrorist? I don't know. Are my children who are American terrorists? I don't know. They have a Bitcoin wallet, right? How far do they go? They said they'd go to families. Maybe they're terrorists. They're not even Canadian, right? I'll never get them Canadian citizenship. Why would I do that, right? So you get this really flaccid behavior. And what's more repelling than flaccid? It's not attractive, right? If you're in a relationship, if you're perpetuating something forward, flaccid behavior doesn't really do it, right? You're not going to get much. So we see this kind of flaccid behavior. And then we look at the Canadian dollar, right? The Canadian dollar. So one of the pillars of Canada was this trustworthy, bedrock, conservative banking system. It's literally the foundation of the country, right? Canada was almost a copy of American federalism, except they made banking federal in order to build infrastructure east-west across the country, namely the railroad. They weren't going to get financed by England, and they had to beat the private interests of the United States after the Civil War that were building north-south up into Canada to extract resources. Canada had British Columbia on the Pacific Ocean, and it had Ontario, Quebec, and the Atlantic provinces, and it needed to link them east-west before north-south interests came. England had one look at America after the Civil War and said, we're not fighting them again. Forget it. Like, these guys are machine guns now. They're crazy, right? They're on their own, Canada. Forget it. Get eaten or whatever. We're not paying for shit. And so the Canadians at the time were benefiting from an America that was basically nobody home. The president after Lincoln was not that powerful. No one was really paying attention, and they just wanted no war, no government. Let's build the country. So Canada operated in that little space and was able to build its railroad, but it had to federalize its banks in order to get, that was the reason to build the country, to make federal banking and be able to finance this cross-continental railroad. And so that's always been a really important part of the country. And that committee that I worked on, the Senate Banking Committee, is the original parliamentary committee in Canada. It's the oldest committee. It's the reason they built Parliament. They wanted that committee to finance the railroad, first order of business. And so, you know, this was something that Canada has been able to build from for generations, But when we're talking about Newton's third law, equal and opposite reaction, I don't know if everyone knew how drastic they went in one direction and what it can reverberate as. And when I look at it again, you know, we got the governor of the Bank of Canada right now. This is kind of a simple man, right? He's kind of a simple guy. I've met him a few times. He was the governor under Mark Carney before, And then he went and became the Rotman Business School chancellor or chair or whatever. It's the big business, it's like Harvard Business School in Canada. And back then I said, hey, let's do a Bitcoin thing. He said, no thanks. I'm going to do a blockchain technology thing with Don Tapscott. Don Tapscott's a nice guy, right? But he did not see the field. Just the other day, he's in an interview with a mainstream media journalist, mainstream media, right? Not a Bitcoin journalist. He did an interview with a mainstream media journalist who said, what do you think about all this Bitcoin and crypto stuff? And the governor of the Bank of Canada says, oh, they only use it for speculation. Right? And the journalist, mainstream media journalists, not a genius either, right? Says, that's not exactly true. I see them doing a lot of stuff here, like energy and all that's happening, right? And that one question flustered the guy. I mean, he couldn't answer it. He stuttered, looked like a simple fool, right? Sorry, looked like a simple guy. So this is the fella, right? This is the fella who probably did not predict there'd be anything like an Emergency Measures Act going into the banking sector in Canada, right? I don't think he imagined that. So now he's got to pick up the pieces. Is there full faith and credit still in the Canadian dollar? Isn't there some form of counterparty risk now that people aren't paying attention to, right? I continue to predict you're going to see it, especially in Bitcoin. Crypto people have a much better understanding of the risk of fiat currencies because they've seen so many altcoins go to zero. We know what it looks like, right? People in crypto know what coins going to zero looks like. They're really trained. They've seen it many times, right? And I can imagine you're going to start to see discount trade pairs for the Canadian dollar. I think you're going to see 4%, 5% rebates at exchanges in order to induce activity around Canadians who are definitely looking for a way out, right? Definitely looking for a way out. So there's this whole new vein of liquidity coming into Bitcoin. And I can see that money being dumped back on the foreign market. And if that happens, Newton's third law is going to get rip-roaring. And all of these forces combined in that Newtonian way send Bitcoin up. That's how I see it anyway. That's today's episode of The Breakup.
Thank you, Nolan. It's always a very educational lesson with you. I do kind of want to ask, I love the Munger variant. I'm probably going to steal that.
Munger variant, it works. We got to make it popular.
Really does.
It's the Munger variant. It's the hunger, but you're missing it. And then you got to look at his eyes, and he's, I don't want to make fun of anyone's looks. He's an old fella, right? So let's give him that. But he is from the silent generation. And they were from the silent generation because most of them had absurd opinions when the 1950s and 60s came around, and they had to shut their mouths, right? Their corollary woke generation or whatever, I think is up for the same thing. They're going to be like Mungers, right? They're not going to be able to talk about stuff.
I do want to ask you, on the other end of the spectrum, though, what is the opposite of the Munger variant to you? Like, is it the purely most open-minded? I would assume in that sense, someone like Bukele falls under that umbrella for you.
Yeah. Once you see that there are these institutional problems, that there isn't almost like, so I guess here's how I would see it. There's a group of people that come from that World War II era, and they saw the institutions they built deliver victory in World War II. And so that almost became the de facto reality of a lot of these people, that these institutions were so good at beating the Nazis that they would be just as good at a war on poverty, just as good with all the other social ills that came about. Of course, we saw that that wasn't the case, right? That a lot of these institutions weren't giving you freedom. We didn't get our freedoms from these institutions in the first place. They did not provide us with all of these things, right? They won a victory in a war, but are not the actual plant that has delivered all of this bountiful, progress that we all enjoy. So there are some people who absolutely believe it, though. If it wasn't for liberal democracies, we wouldn't have the things we have. And they have been successful. I would say part of that, those institutions are there. It's not the opposite of the Munger variant. It's when you go further. It's when you realize these institutions aren't really even worth saving, that their mere perpetual nature is what keeps them from getting to their goals. It's like, look, climate change, right? Is it happening? Isn't it happening? Looks like it's happening, right? Looks like humans cause it, right? But would any of them be willing to say that the solution was found? I mean, objectively, or would they just say, well, maybe that's a solution, but we got to keep looking, because that's their livelihood, that's their job. If we just have to go home tomorrow, right? Like if someone actually does find a way to make a better Bitcoin, would we resist it? Yeah, I think so. I think we're all biased enough to say that's not a better Bitcoin, right? No. I don't know if we would be the first to see it, right? So what I see with Bukele is someone who is the first to see beyond the toolkit he was given. And I think that's what the Munger variant leaves out. You're looking at the normal problems and you're saying these are the solutions, and you're not seeing the solution. It isn't the binary choice. It isn't black or white. It's this other thing that's orange, right? That's what he did. That's the difference as far as I can tell.
I think you lay it out very clearly, and I want to take a quick moment now to sort of highlight. I know our producer Chris is going to throw it on the screen momentarily. I'm going to read off this tweet that Bukele sent 2 days ago, kind of to your point. Although I think I'm going to read it and then we can sort of discuss it a little bit more. But Bukele tweeted, "I'm sending 52 legal reforms to Congress to remove red tape, reduce bureaucracy, create tax incentives, citizenship in exchange for investments, new securities laws, stability contracts, etc. The plan is simple. As the world falls into tyranny, we'll create a haven for freedom."
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like he's almost maybe collabed with you before you released this episode to talk about one of the things I shouldn't do.
No, look, once again, it's that engine, right? What he's saying is I'm scrapping the engine. I can't mind read him. I don't know what his true intentions are, and it's not my intention to trust him, right? That is not in my field or parameters. However, where I will give him the benefit of the doubt is, and where I will see the direction he's going and not be insulted by it, is the following. All the things he's talking about getting rid of, the checks and balances, are already corrupted, right? What we should be aspiring for, even in the case of the United States, right? Let's look at Canada. How does Canada end up out of this? Right now, this is the proper way to describe Canada: a constitutional monarchy with a strong welfare state, right? So it's a constitutional monarchy with a strong welfare state. I would say that's a non-controversial, or at least 90% of people could get behind.
Back. Yeah, I want to push back on that.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Because while I don't agree with any of the decisions Trudeau has been making right now, he has not yet laid claim to a throne. He has not laid claim and said, I am not going to the due process of election. He has done actions that are abhorrent and frankly wrong. But I think to call it a monarchy is...
Well, no. I'm not calling him a monarch. I mean, we have a queen.
Right. Okay. Fair.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. Like we got a queen and she has COVID right now, right? That's what I mean. He's not a king. No. I'm not saying that. That's not what I'm saying. Okay. So just a form of government is not a republic. It's a constitutional monarchy with this strong welfare state on top of it, right? So my prediction is more that a lot of that stuff gets boiled away over time and it just becomes a constitutional state, right? Like almost like there's not as many laws, not as many programs, not as many bureaucracies, right? All the things we ramped up ended up putting distance between us and the Constitution in the United States as well, right? In the United States as well. The actual institutions of the Republic were enough check and balance. All the stuff that got added after, all the red tape that got added after, actually took away the form of representative government. It's what's delivered these idiot politicians to us. So, I mean, they're always pretty stupid, but now they just have to get the campaign funds and get on the campaign, but they're told what to vote, right? You know, the think tanks give them the laws. That's just how it works, right? In Canada and the United States, the parliamentarians do not write a single law. They don't know how. I took in law school a course on law writing and understood the basics and what to do. When I worked in Parliament, I never found a parliamentarian who knew anything about it. They're not the first thing, right? All legislation is drafted by think tanks. It's then given to the parliamentary researchers, which is what I did, and it gets tweaked. But it comes from these places, right? So when I hear Bukele saying he's going to get rid of government, there is a way to interpret it as turning your whole machine into a simple vehicle. Instead of a combustion engine with all of these pieces and a head gasket and coolant system and all that, you're driving a little EV with a simple supercapacitor drivetrain and 1/3 the parts, right? 1/3 the parts. So I would continue to give him the benefit of the doubt, even with that quote. But I could be wrong. I don't spend enough time studying everything he's doing in his thing, and I don't love the thing on the side, all this stuff. I don't love that, whatever that is that dictators wear sometimes, that cross thing they wear, the ceremonial clothing of a Latin American leader. I don't, I think politicians should wear t-shirts now. Like we're done, like the tie and the stuff. I don't know what this thing's all about.
I love the healthy skepticism. I think we are very quick to buy into language that is said that fits our narrative without recognizing that politicians have literally made a career doing exactly that, feeding a narrative to a subgroup to garner their support, only to very quickly cast them aside. So I think a healthy skepticism, regardless of where or what country or what they say, is just and should be held. I do, however, like his approach, and this comes from someone who's like, I enjoy comedy. I enjoy roasts, and I enjoy a good, like, funny troll. And the way Bukele has approached both the IMF on a global scale, as well as individual countries, calling out other leaders after he himself has been called out for questionable behavior, I think it stands to show and prove that while he may say certain things, his actions continue to fall in line with what he has said in this short term where he has been on our radar. I won't act as though President Bukele was even in the forefront of my mind before June of 2021. He was not. I didn't even know who the president of El Salvador was before June of 2021. However, I think through his actions over just we are now on month 9 since they made it legal tender. You see steps being taken by their country. You continue to see him double and triple down. I mean, you come from a financial background, as do I, and the idea of buying the dip goes against everything that I was ever taught and trained. And yet I have had to, like, over time, break that mold. And you see someone like him jokingly and very jovially bring up and discuss working at McDonald's if this doesn't work out. Mind you, I am not a citizen of El Salvador, and I can understand the concern for those who are there who maybe don't see it through that lens. How do you, Nolan, as in this fake scenario, as anyone who watches this show must come to realize, I love putting people on the spot in these fake scenarios. So Nolan, you are now Bukele for purposes of this exercise. What are you going to try to do to appease your current citizens who maybe are not as pro Bitcoin, or who maybe don't see it the way that you see it, to hopefully remain in power and be reelected to continue pushing forward? Because that is the secondary hurdle here, is he doesn't have an infinite amount of time. You have a preset window that he can work under and push this legislation forward. How do you try to appease the other side in your own country?
Yeah, it's one of the things that the ability that he has to go over the channels the same way Ilhan Omar does, right? He's able to say things that I think ricochet in both communities in his country. And, Trump had this ability where even if someone hated him, he was able to say things that made you stop, right? So take the example of just recently, when he was already out of the presidency and the statues were coming down for General Lee. And this was at the same time as the Afghanistan pullout was happening, right? So it's a chaos in Afghanistan, Americans, we don't know what's going on. And they ask him, right? They ask him what he thought about General Lee. And his answer was to take these two crazy stories, Afghanistan and General Lee. And he goes, General Lee, he would have won in Afghanistan. It's not an opinion about, there's no opinion about like whether we should take the statues down or not, or argue about it. So if I was Bukele, I would continue to do that, where you're saying things that force people to fill in the blanks, because that's the way the human mind works, right? It can't help but fill the picture in, right? If I write, FCKTRD, people will understand, if I wrote it down, they would be able to, without the vowels. You've seen those exercises where you fill in text when you only have consonants, right? You're able to read it as if it was natural. The brain will do that. So that's what I see Bukele doing. He's going over, it's almost like communicating in memes, right? And just like Munger said, right, it's a virus. And Bitcoin is communicated better through the dense, rich information of memes than it is through any financial book or anything like that, right? The mimetic power of Bitcoin is, I think, what he's tapping into, and I think it's a lot more persuasive than anything else out there. So if I was there, I would do, and the same as Trump. I mean, what did he say when he was getting kicked out? I did it for the memes. That's like one of his last tweets. You know what I mean? Like, I did it for the memes. And that's what made it all hilarious. And I think that's the final point here, is that why do we have to be so serious with all of these politicians? Trump degraded them. They're TV stars now, right? And I'm 100% Kanye West 2024 or anyone like him. Like, I think he would be one of the greatest presidents in the history of America. He's bigger than president. He could be bigger than president. He could be like spiritual healer of the country, as weird and whatever as he is. There's more out there than just presidency, although he could do the presidency if he feels like it. So because of his power of communication, it's just off the charts, right? There's nobody like it. And Bukele gets it. He's not sitting here making an argument about, well, I talked to my central bank guy and he said you're going to be, da 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 da. He didn't do that, right? He went memes. And I think that just as far as knowing where the world's at, understanding and being aware of how to communicate, he's a modern person. He's not going to bother like Dick Pound, right, on a Zoom call with a fucking, pardon me, with someone who's a victim of human trafficking, the CCP, and say, what, like, what happened, right? He's not going to fall for that. So I mean, I wouldn't know how to do his job really, but from what I see, he knows how to manipulate these tools, and it's so far so good. What I say again is that their TV stars don't really look to them in the end, right? They're side characters in the larger narrative, and hopefully if they're successful, more than footnotes and important people, but they're not Bitcoin, right?
They're side characters with too much power right now, though.
Sure.
Like, I love that analogy. I think all of us in this community do hope that their power becomes negated over time. And I think part of that is taking the centralized financial markets out of their control very quickly negates a lot of their power.
But that's what he's good at. It's the same as Joe Rogan. He seems to be drawing poison out, right? And when you're able to draw poison out like that, and you're able, I mean, that's what this thing in Canada has done really well, is that you can't hide behind wishy-washy, flaccid arguments anymore. Oh, you can't get away with that. The reality is, I don't know if I'm a terrorist. I don't know if I can go back to my country. You know what I mean? Like, right. I don't know. Maybe I do. Maybe I can. I'm not going to try it. Like, and so, I don't want to laugh about it. I think eventually we will laugh about it, but globally, right? Right now it's real, and I like Barbados. I'm glad I saw it coming.
I mean, you saw it ahead of most, and I hope everyone who's been tuning into your episodes of the Breakup paying close attention.
I think we were the first show to cover the truckers, by the way. We were covering them when it was just a couple of tweets. Let's not forget.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Well, unfortunately, we were hoping to have some other stuff regarding the truckers, but the Canadian border was not as kind to us as we had hoped it to be.
Oh, you didn't get in?
I did not get in.
Where did you fly into? How did you drive, or what?
Did not fly. Attempted to drive. I'll give you the gruesome details offline.
Crossed secretly a few times in this COVID time, so
we were trying to look it up, but I will admit wholeheartedly, my LA California-ness was really coming out when we were up in Vermont and the temperature was below 10 degrees. And the idea of walking across a border with no understanding of or knowledge of when we would be able to A, find a place to rent a car, or B, be able to rent a car.
What border were you trying to cross?
Vermont.
But which one? If you remember the town you were in. Highgate, Swanton. Did you go up to 89?
It was, I'll show you right now. Yes, we were going up to 89.
Yeah. Near my farm, man. You were very close.
Yeah.
You're very close to the summer studio.
Hopefully though, things will change. I mean, to be honest, it'll be interesting to see sort of what the reaction over the next coming weeks are. I saw something posted on Twitter by Trudeau as well just now. He has definitely lost favor. And I think if you had been talking about Justin Trudeau 5-6 years ago, it would have been a much different conversation around him, both tonally as well as just overall on a global landscape. But there also is just, I think, a broader idea of, you kind of touched on this, the trucker convoy was not really, and still is not really being discussed broadly by the media. You see a certain narrative being described about both the truckers' side of this argument as well as Trudeau's side of the argument. And in a weird, just pointing at facts, whether or not I agree with them, they exist. Majority of Canadian citizens that have been polled, I need to find the source of this. I heard this on the All In podcast, but a majority of Canadian citizens support Trudeau and his actions right now.
Yeah, so my only answer to that is that I've dealt bilaterally with most of the pollsters in Canada, and they're all frauds. It's very easy to manipulate all of it. I know them personally, like Leger, all these guys, right? I mean, this is my world. So it's a scam. I wouldn't believe it. I wouldn't. I'm not just going to discount it like that. I just know how they can do it. And these guys, so the polling agencies have the major clients are the media companies, right? They pay them to do a poll. Each poll is like $100 grand or something, right? So they pay them like $100 grand. Well, the media companies themselves have to suck on Trudeau's teat to get the money in the first place. Because as I said, they're all out of business. We would not have a domestic media because Canadians will just leech off of American media. So we don't really support our own as much as maybe, other countries who speak a different language and who are culturally, like in Australia, right? They'd have more of their own media. It's just like, why doesn't Canada have like a movie industry? Well, because we just disappear in Hollywood, right? Like,
whoa. You guys
we
have
make
a
movies
movie
in Canada,
industry.
but I mean,
we film in Hollywood moves to Vancouver.
Yeah.
Hollywood
Exactly. It just stands in for the United States. All these Canadian actors that you didn't know were Canadian, that you thought were American. So it's kind of the same thing across the media landscape. And that's why, like, even for news, Canadians would watch CNN or Fox just as easily as an American would. It wouldn't be foreign news to a Canadian, even though it's not covering us domestically. Most Canadians would just watch that stuff. So what it meant was our newspapers and our news channels already had low following. And I mean, the CBC, the main broadcaster, is probably the worst broadcaster of any rich country in the world, like as far as total IQ and product quality, right? Like no one smart, no one doing anything good, nothing worth consuming. Just they wish they could be PBS or NPR, and they're not even close to that, right? And they overtly say it out loud. We wish we could be PBS, but they get billions in free money from the government. I mean, billions, right? So, and it's across the whole landscape. It's the private ones too. It's not just the public ones. So, like our private networks just buy syndicated US TV shows for prime time, right? Jeopardy and all this stuff, right? Another Canadian, Alex Trebek, right? Like we're just camouflaged everywhere, right? So we buy the thing, and then you watch the show, and then they just do a little news thing, but they're subsidized to do it. So it's complete garbage, right? Complete garbage. So if there is a poll, now I'm not saying he can't win. That's not what I'm saying. I don't think there would be much confidence in the elections next time. His popular vote was already lower than, he did one of those things that you see in the States often where you lose the country, the electoral college, but you have the popular vote. He did that. He lost the popular vote, but won the electoral college. What our
I
version
need to
of the
clarify
electoral
this really quickly, Nolan.
Yeah.
Yes, this has happened repeatedly in recent history in America.
Yeah.
That is not actually the norm.
No, I know.
I just want to, I need to clarify.
Sure,
that,
but we've
yes,
had two or three
witnessed
now or whatever, right?
Yes.
And so in Canada, because it is a multi-party, it's actually pretty common, right? It's not so abnormal that you don't win the popular vote, but you get enough seats to win, because it's a first past the post county riding system. So whoever has the most ridings forms government, and so it's a little different than the States. So he won, the majority of, not even the majority. He does not have a majority. He can be toppled at any time. We can have an election next week in Canada, like next week, right? If the other parties gather together to kick him out, he's out, because he doesn't have a majority. So he's at the whim of the House as it is. And all they have to do is say, we don't have confidence, and it's over. And so they're all waiting to do that right now. I mean, definitely waiting, right? The hard left supports him for now, but there you go. The hard left will turn their back on him when they know it's time. And they want what he took from them. He took from them, that's how he became prime minister. He took Toronto from the hard left party and Vancouver from the hard left party. He only made it because they turned those into like what would have been an Ilhan Omar or an AOC seat, right? They changed into normally Democrat seats. That's what made him win. That's going to flip, right? That's going to flip if they do it, right? The problem with that hard left party in Canada is they chose a fella who was really rich and not really like a grassroots country kind of guy, right? It's not working out for him. So losing power.
No, I mean, look, I appreciate the lesson into Canadian politics, because I think a lot of that would go over Americans' heads. A quick reminder for those of you who don't realize it, but our political system is unique to just America. Literally no other country uses it, probably for good reason, but I don't know. I kind of want to ask you, while I have an expert in Canadian sort of politics and society, having a country with multiple parties, not just two, but multiple parties beyond that, what effect has that had, net positive or negative, as far as passing legislation?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of minority parliaments. When I first joined the Senate and all that research stuff, we were a minority group that ran the country from 2016 to 2011. So 5 years, 2006 to 2011. So 5 years of minority parliament. And it was actually better legislation, because everything had to be compromised on. You couldn't strong arm anything through any committee. Everything had to be compromised and in the middle. And it was actually one of the best times for Canadian government, I would say. When the Conservative Party that I was working for took power in 2012, they basically ignored everyone like me, who was from the small government, sort of more populists inside. Let's get rid of drug laws. Let's do a little more libertarian things, right? Once there was a majority, we almost lost our footing. We were really influential in those early years because we could pit everyone against each other and sort of come up the middle with the small government compromise thing. And once it went majority, we were out. And by the end, by 2015, when I'm already full into Bitcoin, I voted for the NDP in downtown Toronto, the hard left, just to prevent what I saw coming, which was a liberal majority, because they would take those AOC seats. There would be this sort of thing to get out the majority, which I wanted the Conservatives out by then. I did personally wanted them out, right? Like rot goes into any party. And I saw it in the one that I was even associated with, and I wanted them out, right? Done. Slightly hobbled. I didn't want them, and which is where they were, right? They got brought back to earth. They couldn't legislate as they chose. And they wasted those years of majority. They could have done, and that's where we thought we had lost an opportunity. We wanted to rip FinTrack out of the ground. That was my number one goal, rip FinTrack right out of the ground. And we had a chance to do it, could have strong-armed it. They backed off, got weak knees, said, we're gonna be in power for years, we'll do this later. I said, tear the CBC down. right? They did not do it. They let it all go. And then even we tried to fight copyright laws, and now we see what happened in Canada. It's an abomination. If your live stream had music on it, you got it taken down for copyright laws if you walked through a protest. And so they've weaponized. Yeah. No good. Live streams, if they caught a song more than the YouTube algorithm would allow for non-licensed audio material, your live feed of a protest was taken away, deplatformed. That happens regularly. Yeah. So garbage.
Well, despite all of that, can I get one more dick pound, and then we'll call it a breakup segment for today? Because I don't think we can end on such a sad, morose note.
Can you get one more? What? Sorry, I missed it.
Dick pound.
One more dick pound. Dick Pound's quite a guy, guys. I mean, he's got to go. We got to look into Dick Pound's, we got to know what's in his hidden places, right?
Thank you for helping make this segment. And
I want that nuclear guy I want the nuclear guy who everyone's giving a hard time about to say, hey, look, why don't we have a little more transparency on old Dick? Right? Let's shine a light on Dick. Let's see if Dick dresses up and is weird, right? Because I think everyone's a little bit, if we knew the truth, right? And so, I think that's a little story that doesn't look like a lot today. And you see people freaking out everywhere about this guy because he's dressing like a woman with the lipstick and all that. I don't know anything about the person. I might not like their politics or anything. All I mean is that transparency's got to happen. I don't think we win the privacy debate. I think privacy is a thing you can buy in Bitcoin block space, and that's about as good as it's going to get, right? There's going to be a lot more information sharing, surveillance, all that. I think our place is banking, money, change, all that. The privacy fight's a whole nother one, right? And I think we can do it. It's another fight, but it's a service you're going to buy. And for now, we need radical transparency. That's the only antidote, right? It's not to get them to stop spying on us. I don't think we can in the short term. I think we can fight the money first. We got to get to the next boss after, but that's a whole nother story. The best we can do in the meantime is insist that transparency goes up the chain as much as it's coming down. And if you want medical tyranny, I want to know where you're getting your money from. I want to know who's funding you. I want to know all of that stuff. And I want to know who you're hanging out with in your private time. Sorry, I do. If you're a pharmaceutical CEO, I want to know who's in your bed. I do. Unfortunately, I do. I don't want to know really, but now we have to. So
I also want to know whose bed you're in.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And Dick Pound's got a lot of explaining to do, right? Because old Dick's, he's okay with Peng Shui's trouble, and I'm not sure, right?
If you haven't figured it out, it's a group of 12-year-old boys that run this YouTube stream. So every time he says Dick Pound, we are cackling on mute.
It's his actual name, Richard, but come on, Dick.
Nolan,
but he goes by Dick publicly. Dick Pound. Real guy.
There's got to be something wrong with men who intentionally go by Dick, in my opinion, just my 2 cents.
If you can find the most absurd pictures of him on the internet will be when they're into this, when they graduate colleges and they have all the regalia, and you matriculate and they have all the feathers and all the stuff, right? I've seen him at the McGill grad with all the stuff. This stuff's, it's pretty crazy, right?
Nolan, you are incredible. Thank you so much for coming on. This segment of the breakup was awesome. We are going to cut now to our exclusive documentary. Our team over here worked really hard to put this together. Natalie Burnell as well was a part of this. Documentary is called Go Fund Yourself, about the Canadian truckers. So stick around. We're going to premiere it here, and it's also going to be available as its own standalone video, but we hope you enjoy it.
There's an expression, right? Canadians are nice, except on the ice. This is right now our winter time, and this whole protest is taking place on the ice, okay? Like, these truckers are coming from across the country, going through minus 20 degrees Celsius and colder nights, and they are demonstrating for freedom.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views.
GoFundMe says it won't transfer any more fundraising, about $9 million left, after the company says it received evidence the demonstration has become an occupation, with reports of violence and unlawful activity.
They're actually shutting down freedom of speech.
It really bothers me.
They're not just going to leave because they're not getting the money from the GoFundMe. They're staying.
We won't be leaving.
You've probably seen videos like this all over the internet in the past few days. Canadian citizens expressing their opposition to government mandates and making use of their right to protest. It all started on January 15th when a few hundred truckers started a convoy to Canada's capital, Ottawa, in order to protest the nation's vaccine mandates for cross-border truckers. What started as a small convoy ended up with more than 35,000 truckers blocking downtown Ottawa, joined by ordinary Canadian citizens who support what's now called the Freedom Convoy 2022. The protests spread to other cities, with more and more people joining the movement. In fact, people from all over the world got caught up in the energy and shared their support for the truckers from Canada. Nearly $10 million in donations were raised by international donors, most of the donations made on a platform called GoFundMe. GoFundMe is an American for-profit company that provides a crowdfunding platform where, quote, individuals, teams, organizations, and nonprofits can champion causes that matter and raise money to make a lasting difference. On February 4th, after more than 10 million Canadian dollars were raised, GoFundMe announced its decision to remove the donation page for violating its terms of service and return the funds to donors, meaning the money never reaches the Freedom Convoy movement. It's important to note that on its official website, GoFundMe promises a donor guarantee that says our team of specialists work night and day to make sure the funds get to the intended recipient every time. We asked GoFundMe for an interview to share their side, but they ignored all of our requests. By shutting down the donation page for the Canadian truckers and thereby seizing the funds donated by people from all over the world, the company appears to violate its own policy.
It's become an occupation, is only hurting families. It's hurting businesses.
After law enforcement officials framed the protest as an occupation, GoFundMe claimed that there's evidence of violent protesters taking part in the Freedom Convoy, meaning the fundraiser is in violation of the company's terms of service. But there haven't been any arrests made for violent crimes reported in Ottawa. To put it in simple terms, it appears the government may have gone to this centralized entity and imposed pressure to make them shut down this campaign.
There's no question they were pressured, but I think they made a horrible decision. But they're done, right? GoFundMe is done.
Days after the announcement, the Canadian government pushed it one step further by invoking the Emergencies Act, which legally gives them the right to freeze bank accounts and cryptocurrency wallets.
As part of invoking the Emergencies Act, we are announcing the following immediate actions. First, we are broadening the scope of Canada's anti-money laundering and terrorist financing rules so that they cover crowdfunding platforms and the payment service providers they use. These changes cover all forms of transactions, including digital assets, such as cryptocurrencies. The illegal blockades have highlighted the fact that crowdfunding platforms and some of the payment service providers they use are not fully captured under the Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing Act. Our banks and financial institutions are already obligated to report to the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, or FINTRAC.
So far, Canadian officials have already blacklisted about 34 cryptocurrency wallets linked to the protesters. Regardless of how you feel about the government mandates and the protests, this should definitely worry you. Financial censorship has happened over and over on both sides of the political spectrum. Recently, the funding of the left-wing Progressive International was shut down by a Dutch bank and by PayPal. And you may remember a website called WikiLeaks, whose funding was also cut off by Visa and MasterCard, pulling the plug on payments. This highlights the vulnerability of centralized entities, which are ripe for the picking when the political motivation behind certain causes are not aligned with the centralized governing bodies of the platform. And you may have heard or said this phrase many times now, but yes, Bitcoin fixes this. The peer-to-peer uncensorable nature of a Bitcoin transaction makes it possible for individuals and groups to fund causes without government or corporate intervention. Bitcoin operates on a decentralized network that is distributed all over the world, which makes it practically impossible to be manipulated. And Bitcoin is basically code, which is a form of speech, and therefore should be protected by freedom of speech.
Very simply, it's decentralized. There is no one CEO, let's call it a CEO of Bitcoin. The network is protected by all the nodes and miners distributed around the world. It is the world's strongest computer network, most powerful computer network right now. And the value of it is to be able to transfer value from your wallet to another wallet with no centralized control. It's 100% your direction and discretion where that value, called Bitcoin, can end up. I like that ability. It's my money, it's my monetary energy, and I want to take and be able to spend that monetary energy wherever I please.
Bitcoin transactions don't go through a bank or corporate intermediary. They go from individual to individual directly, instantly, and with almost no cost. Once a Bitcoin transaction is signed on the distributed ledger of the network, it can't be stopped or taken back. Not even your government can stop it. It's unstoppable electronic cash.
I wanted to try and engage the Bitcoin community in this fundraising efforts. And it was lucky that my partners, who are talented technicians and Bitcoiners like Ben Sessions, BTC Sessions, and then at Nobody Caribou. But we did set it up prior to GoFundMe freezing the funds. And it's lucky because now they had another platform that could seamlessly be used for these donations. And guys, this is the key. And it shows the use case of Bitcoin over centralized platforms, right?
However, this is only possible if you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody. Leaving your Bitcoin on an exchange does make you vulnerable. In the Bitcoin community, there's a saying, not your keys, not your Bitcoin, meaning that only if you hold your own private keys to your Bitcoin are you fully sovereign holding your own property. Most cryptocurrency exchanges are centralized entities just as vulnerable as any other financial intermediary. So this should be a warning for everyone once again to withdraw your Bitcoin from exchanges and take full responsibility for your own private keys. The GoFundMe problem is one of the best examples to prove Bitcoin's use case. This is why the world needs Bitcoin. WikiLeaks was one of the first organizations to use Bitcoin as a way to circumvent the payment censorship by MasterCard and Visa. Also, the left-wing initiative Progressive International switched to Bitcoin donations after being censored by PayPal. Bitcoin works, and it's reliable. A few days ahead of the GoFundMe campaign shutdown, the Bitcoin fundraiser by Canadian Bitcoiners started to go viral. They've raised up to 22 Bitcoin so far on an open Bitcoin-only crowdfunding platform called Tallycoin, where donations go directly to the recipient without any intermediary in between, making it impossible to seize the funds.
Freedom from financial censorship, individual, collective, all the above, right? We've faced a ton of that so far with GoFundMe and the government, and I think, you know, we're not truly free until we remove the control that politicians have over our money. And we can use this opportunity to educate truckers, Canadians, and the world about the importance of returning to a sound money standard and not digging ourselves into a debt that our kids are going to have to pay.
Although the move by GoFundMe may have caused a lot of chaos and anger, it may be a good thing it happened because once again, it proves Bitcoin's use and more people see that their money isn't safe with centralized authorities.
BS about call presents and stuff like that. Real quick. Hey man, how's it going? No, yeah, go ahead. You're good.
I'm gonna give this to you.
Oh, nice.
Remember how I came and gave you some sats?
Yeah.
There's $8 grand of Bitcoin in there.
Ooh, in here?
In there.
As soon as the bank shut down, we had some big donors that were like, we need to get Bitcoin to these truckers. I'm not kidding you. So keep it safe. Basically open it up. There's instructions. All you do is do a recovery code. It's going to tell you to download Blue Wallet, which is what the recovery code's for. So it'll be a different wallet than the first one I showed you.
Okay.
Boot it up. It's yours.
Fuck,
Thanks for your service.
Insane, man. That's ridiculous. No, that's fine.
All right, dude, you came all the way here and you're saving our fucking country. That's ridiculous.
Holy shit, yeah.
That's a thank you from the Bitcoin community.
Holy fuck.
Much love,
Jeeps are red, man. That's
There you
great.
go. I'll see you around.
This should be a lesson and an encouragement for people to become sovereign with their financial situation and be aware that it's better to verify, not trust. And whether you support a cause or not, this kind of censorship can happen to anyone at any time. And this goes not only for money, but for so many different aspects of your life, especially in the realm of information. You can do so much to become sovereign, like hosting your own mail server, hosting your own cloud or calendar, or running your own Bitcoin node. Bitcoin taught us to become more independent as individuals, and it all starts with our money.
You're supposed to be able to send your monetary energy wherever you want, in my opinion. I don't have to agree with it, but the freedom and the ability to do that is absolutely a cherished right in any country that claims to be free. If you think that GoFundMe is a bad thing, wait until central bank digital currencies, okay? That is the really scary thing. And that is why we Bitcoin.
Wow, that was awesome. That was moving. I want to shout out Aaron over on our team here at Bitcoin Magazine for putting that together, and Natalie for narrating it and lending her voice to Aaron's vision. That came out beautifully. As Nolan touched on, we over here at Bitcoin Magazine have been on the forefronts of reporting on the trucker convoy. We've made a point to highlight the events going on, bring awareness to it, and help push it forward. We will continue to do that, and I'm really proud of our team over here that put this together. So be sure, we will be circulating a link all over social medias, and it's live now on our YouTube page of just that documentary itself. Please make sure to share it with everyone, especially those who maybe are not as aware of what's going on north of the border. Mainstream media has done a terrible job reporting on it, due in large part, in my opinion, because it just doesn't align with what they believe and what they want to see. It's not the narrative that helps them. And so as a result, it gets pushed to the side. So let's take the control back from mainstream media, make sure as many people as possible watch that and are educated about what's going on. Because just as easily and quickly as it happened up in Canada, it can happen in America. I think Justin Trudeau showing this insane control over the financial systems and forcing people to not have access to their own money is a scary reality that Canadians woke up with one day and didn't think that it was possible. Just like many Americans wake up and don't think that it's possible, or people all across Europe. This is a scary possibility that has come to fruition for a population, and we need to do everything in our power to draw attention to it and show why it is wrong so that it never happens again. We talk a lot about not allowing history to repeat itself. Well, this is history happening in real time. This is going to be something that our kids talk about. Whether or not you agree with it, it is, I'm sorry, but in the same way that we learned about 9/11 in school, kids are going to learn about the time the Canadian government took away their access to money. This is a very serious thing that will have implications that will last far longer than when this decision gets overturned. You can return the money to them right now, Justin Trudeau, and I promise you, people will never forget this. This will be your legacy at this point, is taking money away and preventing people from accessing the work and time they put into generating their own wealth. My heart goes out to everyone who is still dealing with this. I hope for nothing more than a speedy resolution to this. And if Bitcoin needs to be the one that saves the day, this is what it was meant to do. It was meant to save us from the tyranny and the overreach of government, whether it's overspending on their part, whether it's them inflating money to fatten their own pockets or finish whatever they see fit, or preventing the government from stopping you from spending your money on what you determine is valid to spend your money on. Bitcoin was meant to fix these things and so many others. So let us continue to push that forward. And if it won't be Bitcoin, maybe it'll be Bukele in El Salvador that comes and saves the day. On that, guys, we're going to wrap things up. Use code YTMAG. Come hang out with us in Miami. I'm honestly offended at this point if you're watching the show and you have not explicitly said, hey, I'm stuck because of the vaccine mandates in my country, or you know what, I can't make it. I'll tell you this right now. You know what, DB, I'm sorry, but I want to highlight the tweet that you sent out because I think it's important. If it's to a point where you can't afford a ticket, we can help you. All right. Like, everyone just needs to be at this conference. It is so vitally important. Nick brought up in our segment this morning, just being in that environment, being around everyone who wants to see Bitcoin pushed forward, the ideas that stem from this, the people that you will meet, it will change your life for the better. It is a worthy investment for your time and money. That's it. That's me on my rant. That's on the soapbox. We'll see you guys tomorrow.